So I'm sure you've all been in supermarkets and you walk past someone and they stare at you and you think to yourself, goodness, I don't really like you very much. And they're thinking the same thing. I don't like you either. Or you. But of course, you don't actually know each other. So how could that be? How could you stare at someone and them stare at you and instantly you don't like each other? Because of course, the etheric fields have already intersected before you've got to see them. And if your energy is very positive and theirs is very negative, the two obviously don't react very well, and therefore there's an instant dislike. Now, people that have got mental health problems will probably have negative attachments. Young Terry calls them dark force entities, which I think sounds very theatrical. We just call them negs, basically. Negative energies. So they have a spiritual entity with them connected into their etheric field that's negative, and that negative entity will put thoughts in their mind. It will try to orchestrate situations that are negative, so they'll get into arguments with people they bump into. So if they're hearing voices, that negative entity will be talking to them constantly, telling them to do this or to do that. If they don't do this or if they don't do that, bad things happen to their family or their wives or their children. So of course, if you're open in that way and you're hearing these voices all the time, unfortunately you can't turn it off. And of course this is why it drives people mad, quite literally. And they end up in psychiatric units with psychotic episodes, and it's a disastrously terrible place to be. Why does that happen? Well, it happens for different reasons. One of the key reasons, or one of the core reasons, is down to drugs, of course. Because when you're born as a fetus, you're born into this physical world that you call planet Earth. You come in with your fantastic etheric field, and that's designed to protect you and to push back anything negative and to support you in your life as you grow. Now, as you grow from that fetus into a child, potentially, if you have a rather blessed life to start with, bad things don't happen to you, and that etheric field becomes stronger and it becomes better. And hopefully, if you eat the right nutritional requirements for the human being, as opposed to the McDonald's burger, etc., that etheric field gets bigger and stronger and stronger. And then when you come into contact with negativity, it doesn't have a chance, because you've got this fantastic etheric field that you've nurtured and grown, and it protects you in all aspects from a spiritual perspective. Conversely, if you haven't had a great life, or you've had trauma, whether it be physical or sexual or abuse from a young age, then potentially you get into this split personality situation whereby, as a child that's been going through a traumatic sequence of events, what tends to happen is the mind splits, and it creates two people, or sometimes more than two people. So you have the mini person that this is happening to, let's call them Fred, and then you have Brian, who's the person it's not happening to. And that like child starts to live in this way. Sorry, my dear.
So, like Gollum.
I just said like Gollum in The Hobbit, he has like two personalities.
Yes, rather like dear Andrew here, and he has me and him. I'm the clever one, and he's not so clever, of course. But you're exactly right, young man, that's exactly. And of course, this is the thing, is that the television shows you all of these things, because the people that broadcast these programs and make films, they know how this stuff works. They understand what's going on from a spiritual dimensional perspective, and they give it to you in films, because they realise that most people aren't able to actually assimilate this information. It's difficult, it's not what you're taught in school. You know, you're taught complete rubbish that you don't need. Algebra, case rested. Who's ever used algebra since they left school? Nobody, I suppose. Who learnt about mortgages and money and finance and interest rates? Nobody. Which would be more important for you? Possibly the financial teaching. So the school system has been designed to make sure you don't actually understand the things that are, in my opinion, of the most interest and the most benefit for you. As the young man says, Gollum has multiple personalities, and this is what happens with these children that go through different traumas. Now, different people obviously have different thresholds. So for some person, a terrible trauma may not cause them terrible emotional problems, and for someone else, a very minimal trauma may cause them exponentially terrible problems. So everyone is different in the way they work. But people that have had traumas in their young life, then they tend to, if you then augment that basically with bad nutritional choices, etc., the etheric field isn't actually helping them. So now the etheric field, if you can visualise, is what I term as perforated. It's got lots of holes in. And instead of being a completely joined field that's there to support and protect you, it's now got all of these holes in, basically. And effectively, it's another one of my good analogies, I quite like it, is if you can imagine being in a room that's dark and there's nothing in there, and you're in there, and there's lots of these negative things around you, golems we'll call them, because I think that's an extraordinary word, golems. So we're in this room now with all these golems, and do you know what? They can't see us, because our etheric field is protecting us. So if you imagine we now take the child or the person that's had trauma and put them in the room with golems, and there's a light bulb in their heart centre, what can you now see? You can now see all of these fragments of light that come out of all these perforations. And the golem says, yum, yum, fantastic, there's a human being. And just so happens, I actually need to exist on their energy, or I can use their energy as my sustenance, my food. But the thing is, you see, I'm negative, so I don't really work on a high vibration, so I need to get their vibration down to a really low level that tastes great to me. And the way that I can do that is I can start to cause them lots of negativity, start to put bad thoughts in their mind, start to create fear in their life, start to create conditions whereby everything they do becomes negative. So the first thing I do is I connect to them through one of these perforations, I hook in my little pipe, and I sit back and say nothing. And that guy comes out of the room, he goes home, and spends time with his family, and then goes off to school with his friends. And now he's got a neg with him, and of course the neg's job is to make him more negative. So he starts to have terrible bad luck, would you believe? Falls over in the playground, hits his knee, walks into the door, swears at himself, kicks the door frame, you know, the sorts of things. And the day just gets worse and worse. So by the end of the day, this poor lad now goes home to his parents, he's had a terrible day, and he gets into arguments with them. So now he brings their vibration down, his has gone down dramatically, and of course this negative entity starts to think, now we're almost at the right frequency, I can start to feed effectively. I don't know if Gollum does feed, does he? What does Gollum like for his breakfast?
I don't know, it doesn't
Raw
say.
fish.
Fish?
Raw fish.
Well, good choice. Nutritionally good. Japanese like raw fish. Yes. Excellent. So Gollum is having his raw fish effectively. So he's now existing on that substance, that negative frequency of this poor chap. And of course what he starts to then do is look around the family and think, has anyone else got perforations in their auric field that I can connect to? Because if I can connect to another one of the members of the family, I can now orchestrate arguments, and I can orchestrate problems. And when I start to orchestrate these sorts of things, problems start to happen, frequency goes down, I get more substance. So as this happens, of course, what happens is the etheric field of the young lad now is breaking down even more. So now we've got more perforations happening. So of course what happens then is, call in a few of my friends, Gollum 2, 3 and 4 pop in, and we all connect. And then we connect to the parents as well. And then we start to cause as many problems as we possibly can on a day-to-day basis without being seen. So at this point, what we're doing is we're thriving on that negative energy, we're existing, that's our substance, we're looking forward to our tea if we can create another argument, and obviously this just goes on. And to move it to the other end of the scale, it gets to the point whereby we're basically controlling that person, and what we can then do, hopefully, is because this is the key from a negative perspective, is to break the etheric field to the point that we can actually coexist with the spiritual host. So, analogy again, so we've got a car with a driver, and we've managed to get the driver half out of the car, so he's kind of driving, but he's not really in it properly, so he's not driving the car very well at all. And now what we can do is we can open the passenger door and jump in with him. So we've got the physical body, that's a shell, and now we've got two spiritual entities inside that one physical body. We've got the core person that is still trying to drive with half their body outside and their hands in through the wheel, and the passenger now. And of course the passenger is starting to take control. They're starting to talk to the person, but they're clever. So these negative entities have a higher IQ in general than most of the people that they're actually connected to. So dear Andrew, bless him really, just to recap because this is quite funny, quite some time ago when he was working with people and we were actually connecting and talking to the negative entities, and this would go on for like an hour's conversation, and he was saying to me, yeah, fascinating, fascinating. I said, do you realise that none of it's true? These conversations you're having, the things they're telling you complete lies for the whole hour. You're wasting my time, you're wasting your own time, your wife's made a cup of tea and you're still not in from the shed, you're going to be in trouble. So he started to realise that there's no real point talking to Ned because they're never going to tell you the truth, basically. But of course, what tends to happen is the way that they're working is that they're becoming very much in control of that person now, and they start to separate that person from the family. And then of course the next best thing they can do now is try and push the drugs concept, because drugs break down the etheric field. So an etheric field that's already badly compromised and you've got multiple entities connected, if they can get you into the drugs concept, you then space out, you're blissed out, you're having a great trip, you're talking to Jesus, which of course is Gollum and his friends, and Jesus is saying to you, do you give me permission to do whatever I like to you and to take over? And you're thinking, yeah, Jesus, that's really cool, you can do what you like. And now you've just given permission to a negative entity to do whatever it likes to your physicality, your spiritual body. And this is the end game in a way, really, because now they actually have a contract in place with you to actually take over completely and do what they want with your body. And now this is where you get moved into the harder drugs and you start getting into the self-harming problems and such like, because of course more a negative entity's coup d'etat perspective is that it wants you to take your life, because when you take your life there's a huge explosion energetically, and if that negative entity can basically accumulate your energy when you take your life, it can sell and trade that energy on an open market. So very much like you do with cows, you have a cow that you feed, it's great, you walk it into the cow shed, you milk it, milk is the substance, is the product, and then that gets sent to various places to make into cheese, it goes off to supermarkets and you come along and buy it. So the same happens with your energy can be traded on an interdimensional level between different entities, and someone that takes their own life ends up with a huge dramatic explosion of negative energy, which these entities, for them it's the end game, it's the thing they want. And this is why you tend to see the things that you see on television. So you see someone that's gone into a theatre, let's say, and killed half a dozen people, and what you'll find is that if the reporting is true and correct, which of course it probably isn't, but if you were to get a reporter that could actually tell the truth, because of course it's rather controlled, they would say that they heard voices that told them to do it. And the voices will have said, if you don't do this and you don't do that, then we're going to kill your family or do very bad things to you. And if you look at the news and you look through the reports, you'll find that 90% of the people that do these terrible things are actually hearing the voices, and it's the voices that are telling them to do it, but they don't actually realise it's bad because of the consequence of not doing it is worse, if that makes sense. So this is why when you as therapists are working with people, it's so important to make sure that the etheric field of yourself is protected and you're adhering to good nutrition, drinking lots of water, and also when you actually connect with someone, you need to be thinking about, do they have negative entities with them? If they do, then that negative entity is going to be threatened by you, and potentially it's going to want to connect to you as well. So you need to be thinking about clearing them. And if you can't clear them yourself, or you can't see them, then you just put the thought to your guide and say, if this client of mine has got lots of golems eating his fish, then could you please remove them first before we actually start my session? Because I'm not quite keen to deal with the after effects if that's not the case. So does that sort of ring true for you all and make sense?
Yeah.
Excellent. And it was such a good analogy, my friend. Golem. Yes, I'm going to use that. Terry, write that down.
I've made a note.
How are we doing for time, everyone? I'm obviously
It's an
not
hour, so it's about time for a break.
because I used to run over by hours and
Yeah.
Jane would tell me off. Okay, so what I think we'll do is I'm going to return young Andrew to this vehicle that he calls his physical body. Not very well maintained in my particular opinion, but there we are. And I will return in, say, 15 minutes or so.
Thank you.
Thank you.